Hello and welcome. I'm Pip Tomson and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Israel moves closer to a ceasefire with Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's thought Israel's security cabinet could approve the deal tomorrow. 17 people are missing after a tourist boat sinks in the Red Sea. Russia claims Ukraine has attacked in the last 24 hours. Meanwhile, Putin's powerful Oreshnik missile wreck is analysed. And a former British Army soldier has reportedly been captured by Russia whilst fighting for Ukraine. To the developing conflict in the Middle East first, and a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hezbollah is close. That's according to a Lebanese official who confirmed the story to Al Arabiya News. Israel's security cabinet is expected to approve the deal tomorrow. So far, the war has resulted in the deaths of 3,500 Lebanese people in over a year. It comes after Hezbollah attacked near Tel Aviv yesterday, following an Israeli airstrike that killed 29 people in Beirut on Saturday. For more on this, I'm joined from Tel Aviv by our correspondent Sarah Coates. Good evening to you, Sarah. How much optimism is there then that a ceasefire can be achieved? And do run us through the sticking points.
Hello there, Pip. There really is growing optimism here in the region that a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel could actually be achieved in the coming hours, if not tomorrow. Now, we do understand that there are no objections in Lebanon to this US-backed proposal. And here in Israel, it certainly does seem as though things are moving forward. Now, with regards to these sticking points, originally there was a sticking point that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was objecting to France basically having anything to do with implementing this deal, given that France has come out after this ICC ruling came out that was saying that, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu and the former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant would be arrested, with France saying that it would actually abide by this if any of these, if these two men were to set foot on French soil. Now, we do understand that this one has now been wiped, that this would be looked after by a five-party body that would be led by the United States, would also include France. But one of these other sticking points is Israel basically wants the freedom to respond militarily to Hezbollah if this ceasefire deal is violated. So once again, it certainly does seem as though this is moving forward. It would be based on the principles of the UN Resolution 1701, which would mean that these Hezbollah fighters would need to push further north, back behind the Litani River, while Israeli forces would have to completely withdraw from Lebanon. It would be this five-party body that would be monitoring that both sides would be adhering to this proposal. Now, we did also hear from the new foreign minister here in Israel, Gideon Sa'ar. He came out to say that the ceasefire hinges on enforcement and that Hezbollah, of course, must be disarmed and pushed away from the border. We will, of course, know more in the coming hours, but once again, it certainly does appear as though things are moving forward, Pip.
Yes, so it is advancing, Sarah, this ceasefire, but both Israel and Hezbollah attacked over the weekend, didn't they? In fact, it was quite intense. Are we likely to see any more of this whilst we wait for that ceasefire agreement that could come tomorrow?
We certainly are, and as these talks continue, so do hostilities. I'll bring you up to speed with what's happening in Lebanon first. We do know that there have been fresh strikes in the east of the country, in the Bekaa Valley, the death toll standing at around 9 there, while there have been additional strikes in the south of Lebanon, in the Tyre region, with the Lebanese health authorities saying that so far, with these strikes that happened just a few hours ago, that 15 people have been killed. Well, there's been a fresh evacuation order for the Dahya area in southern Beirut, which is traditionally a Hezbollah stronghold. Now, here in Israel, there are continued red alert sirens ringing out, especially in these largely evacuated northern communities. But really over the past sort of day and a half, there's been a real increase in hostilities. Yesterday, there were many red alert sirens ringing out in the centre of the country, including right here in Tel Aviv, with some of these missiles that did come from Lebanon actually making impact. They were not intercepted by the Iron Dome missile defence system, and they did cause quite substantial damage about 30 kilometres from where I'm standing in this suburb of Tel Aviv known as Petah Tikva. Pip.
Sarah, I'm just going to try that again. I wanted to ask you about this passenger boat that has sunk in the Red Sea. What can you tell us about that?
Certainly, this is still a developing story. We do understand that there was an alert put out by the Bureau of Meteorology in Egypt on Sunday, warning no vessel should travel out due to extremely rough seas, rough conditions in the Red Sea. It's unclear as to why this vessel that was carrying reportedly 45 people, including a number of foreign nationals, actually did set out. 17 people are reportedly missing, among them a number of foreign nationals, with helicopters reportedly searching this area, trying to actually locate these people. So once again, this is still a developing story. It's unclear as to why this vessel did set out, but it did take on water. It put out a distress call at around 3:30 GMT today, and we do understand that this search and rescue effort is ongoing.
Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv, thank you. To the US now, and farm industry groups have asked President-elect Trump to spare their sector from his promise of mass deportations, which they say would have a dramatic effect on the food supply chain, which relies on illegal workers. Trump made immigration central to his re-election, and it now appears that he will use the US military to carry out his pledge. It's causing widespread anxiety in migrant communities across the US, and as Tony Waterman reports, has spurred thousands of migrants to make a last-ditch push towards the border.
It's a race against time. Thousands of migrants from across Latin America marching towards the U.S. southern border, trying to reach it before President-elect Donald Trump is sworn in on January 20th.
We're afraid that we might not be able to pass because of Trump.
There might be deportations, but God willing, it won't happen to us.
That's exactly what migrants already in the U.S. are afraid of. Trump has vowed to expel upwards of 11 million people by declaring a national emergency and mobilizing the U.S. military to carry out mass deportations.
There are probably legal ways of doing it.
One option, says law professor Niels Frenzen, would be to federalize and deploy National Guard troops for the purpose of keeping order.
There's a basis in federal law that allows the federal government to place National Guard troops, which are nominally under the control of the governor of a particular state, but they can be federalized and deployed on the streets for law enforcement purposes. That would be, I think, the easier legal path.
Another option, experts say, is to go after immigrants already in the system, like the 863,000 people protected from deportation because their home countries are too dangerous to return to. Or DACA recipients, a program that shields undocumented people who were brought to the U.S. as children from deportation.
We're talking about over 500,000 people who currently have DACA, all of whom would lose their legal permission to be living in the United States and the work authorization that comes. Now, what's complicated about that is, of course, that these people have been here for a very long time.
Migrant aid groups are reporting widespread anxiety, people fearing what comes next.
The reality is that we do not know what happens now. We tell people, now it's a good time to consult an attorney. It's a good time to get your affairs in order.
Here in Texas, Republican officials want to play a leading role in Trump's immigration policy. The state has already offered up land for detention camps to hold migrants before they're deported. The governor has also vowed to install more floating barriers in the Rio Grande River, separating Mexico from the U.S. The message is clear. If you're on your way here, don't come. And if you're already here, get out. Tony Waterman, Al Arabiya News, Austin, Texas.
I want to bring you some other news making the headlines around the world. One person has died and 3 others have been left injured after a cargo plane crashed near Vilnius airport in Lithuania earlier today. The DHL plane, flown by Spanish cargo airline Swiftair, crashed as it was coming into land. The cause of the crash is still being investigated, but the Lithuanian Defence Ministry says there are no signs of terrorism or sabotage. 3 people have been arrested after the body of an Israeli-Moldovan rabbi who went missing in the United Arab Emirates was found over the weekend. Zvi Kogan went missing on Thursday. His body was discovered in the Emirati city of Al Ain. The Emirati Interior Ministry said the ministry would use all legal powers to respond decisively and without leniency to any actions or attempts that threaten societal stability. The far-right pro-Putin candidate Kalin Georgescu has taken the lead in the first round of Romania's presidential election. Georgescu, who has no party of his own, has campaigned primarily on social media platform TikTok. The latest results could mean Georgescu would face centre-right candidate Elena Lasconi of the Save Romanian Union in the final stage of the election on the 8th of December. And more than 30 pilot whales who found themselves stranded on Ruakaka Beach near the city of Whangarei in New Zealand have been returned to the ocean. Hundreds of volunteers, who included conservation workers and members of the public, lifted the mammals out on sheets and into the water. To the ongoing crisis between Russia and Ukraine now. Today, Russia has said it has shot down 8 ballistic missiles sent by Ukraine. Russia's defence ministry has not revealed which type of missiles were launched, but it's thought to be the US-supplied ATACMS, authorised by the Biden administration last week. It comes as Ukraine continues to test the wreckage of Russia's new Oreshnik missile, which was fired in response to Joe Biden's policy shift. For more on this, I'm joined from Kyiv by our correspondent Megumi Lim. Hello to you, Megumi. Tell me, has there been any response at all from Ukraine about these claims from Russia?
Well, we've not yet heard from Ukraine regarding this latest missile attack that was reportedly launched by Ukraine against Russia. As you said, Russia's defense ministry said that 8 ballistic missiles were shot down overnight, launched by Ukraine, but did not give any further details as to what kind of missile was used and where in Russia it was used against. But we did hear from the regional governor of Russia's Kursk region saying that 7 of those missiles were shot down over Russia's Kursk region. Now, this is where fighting has been ongoing between Ukrainian and Russian forces ever since Ukrainian forces launched their surprise incursion into Russia in August of this year. But the governor also didn't provide any more details. However, a military analyst who is also serving as an advisor to this same governor said or claimed that the missiles that were used overnight were, quote, foreign made. So again, it is unclear what kind of missiles were used. Not a lot of details coming out from Russia or Ukraine. But as you said, very possible that it could be the American-supplied ATACMS missiles. We saw Washington lift restrictions on the use of Ukraine's use of these American-supplied ATACMS missiles last week. And we've seen Kyiv waste no time in using them. And we have already seen Ukrainian forces fire these American-supplied missiles into Russia.
Now, experts are carefully studying the debris, aren't they, from Russia's long-range Oreshnik missile, which was fired into Ukraine last week. And what they learn will be crucial when it comes to Ukraine formulating its response.
That's right. Ukrainian experts have begun analyzing the wreckage that was recovered from this attack carried out by Russia using its new intermediate range ballistic missile called the Oryeshnik. As you said, this was the first time that this missile was used against Ukraine, and its use has caused a lot of alarm because of its capability to mount a nuclear warhead. Also, the use of this weapon came just days after Russia updated its nuclear doctrine to lower its threshold for a nuclear strike. Now, Russian President Putin did say that in this instance, there was no nuclear warhead attached, but obviously this wreckage is of great interest to Ukraine. And the study of this debris will be useful for Ukraine in gaining insight into Russian military supply chains, but also Russia's missile production, the components used, but more importantly, insight into how to develop a countermeasure. Experts have said this missile can fly as fast as 13,000 kilometers per hour, and Russian President Putin has said that currently there are no air defense systems that can intercept this missile. However, President Zelensky of Ukraine has refuted this. He's saying that the world does possess air defense systems that can counter this threat. And in light of this latest attack, Ukraine is now asking the United States to update the Patriot air defense systems, which Ukraine has several of provided for by the United States. Or Ukraine is asking the U.S. to supply the THAAD anti-ballistic missile defense systems. These air defense systems are capable of intercepting these types of missiles. So we're seeing the first Ukrainian response, and also a priority for Ukraine is air defense systems to protect the skies over Ukraine.
Megumi Lim in Kyiv, thank you. A man claiming to be a former British Army soldier has been captured by Russian forces whilst fighting for Ukraine. The 22-year-old, named James Scott Rees-Anderson, says he signed up for Ukraine's International Legion after being fired from his job as a private. Well, for more on this, I'm joined from London by our correspondent, Olly Barratt. Hello to you, Olly. What more, then, can you tell us about this captured Briton, and how did he end up fighting for Ukraine?
Well, what we know from the Russian side comes via the TASS news agency in Russia, which quotes a military source saying that a UK mercenary, is how this person is described, was taken prisoner in the Kursk area of Russia. Of course, that is the area that Ukraine has recently made a surprise offensive into. The videos that have been seen circulating online do show this individual, James Scott Rees-Anderson, giving us some of the background about how he came to be in Ukraine fighting there. He says that he lost his job in the UK, travelled from London to Poland on an aeroplane, and then took a bus to the border with Ukraine, and then crossing the border into Ukraine to join the so-called International Legion, which is made up of international foreign volunteers. We're told that he decided to go and fight, having heard and read about the conflict in Ukraine back here in Britain. His father has been speaking to UK media today and says that he did what he thought was right. But he also says, his father, that he is now very frightened about the state of his son. As I say, there are a couple of videos in which he gives some of his own background. James Scott Rees-Anderson talking about having served in the British military himself before losing his job here in Britain, talking about having lost everything at that point and deciding at that point to head to Ukraine and join up, as I say, with this International Legion, and Russian sources now suggesting that what they call a mercenary has been taken prisoner.
Olly, we are looking at pictures of him, or we have been looking in the last few seconds. Can you tell us any information about where he's being held and in what sort of conditions?
Well, only really from what we've been hearing from his father today, who talks about believing that his son looks very frightened. He talks about the fears that he has that his son could be tortured, because he says that's what James Anderson had told him Russians do to prisoners that they take during this conflict. And so clearly his family very concerned for his welfare indeed. We've also been hearing from the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy today. He says that the UK will do all we can to offer this UK national all the support we can. We also have a brief statement from the UK Foreign Office as well, which says that it is supporting the family of a British man following reports of his detention. Clearly there is still a lot that is unknown about the exact circumstances of his detention and location. One of the things that his father has been speaking about today is the possibility that he could end up being used as what his father describes as a bargaining chip in some kind of prisoner exchange, perhaps, and that might lead to his release. But for now, as I say, his father insisting that he is frightened about the state and the welfare and the well-being of his son.
Yes, and of course that prisoner exchange did happen to two other Britons who were captured a couple of years ago. Let me just quickly ask you as well, Olly, about British Government Minister Pat McFadden. Now, he's warned people about Russia's escalating cyber aggression at the NATO Cyber Defence Conference. Can you tell us briefly a little bit more about what he's been saying?
Yeah, he has indeed. Pat McFadden has been warning about the dangers of escalating cyber attacks from Russia over the Ukraine conflict, directed towards some of Ukraine's allies. He's been talking about how the UK is going to set up a new AI unit which can try and deal with some of these attacks before they are launched. But he's also told the audience at the NATO cyber conference here in Britain that the UK will remain unwavering in its support for the Ukrainians, despite threats in recent days from Russia about the view that it believes that it has the right now to attack UK military facilities, given the supply of UK Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine to be used to strike targets deeper inside Russian territory.
Olly Barratt talking to me in London. Thank you very much. On January the 20th, Donald Trump will be sworn in as US president for the second time. His first term in office was marked by radical economic policies, and there is uncertainty in Europe over new tariffs he may introduce during his second stint in power. Ross Cullen reports from Paris on the potential impact in France.
The election of an American president has consequences outside the US, and for Europe, some of the impacts could be economic.
In terms of France, that would be in the range of 10 to 20%. And he specifically mentioned wine, and that's the only product that he has mentioned to my knowledge, especially during his rallies with his supporters across the US.
One possible positive for people in France, the incoming president's pledge to lower the price of oil, which could bring down the cost of filling up all over the world.
But the head of France's central bank says Donald Trump's promised tariffs and protectionist economics would mean, quote, higher inflation, most likely in the United States, and most probably lower growth throughout the world.
And it's not just trade where there could be a potential economic impact.
American companies are the number one foreign investor in R&D activities in France. So if there was anything that would impact those investments, that would be something of concern for France, which has made a very overt effort under Mr. Macron since he's been president with this program Choose France, for example, to attract American investment to France.
Paris is one of Washington's oldest and closest allies. And outside the European Union, the United States is France's biggest trading partner. As the incoming American administration prepares to take office, France is readying itself for all economic outcomes of a second Trump term. Ross Cullen, Arabiya News, Paris.
Bringing you some of the top business news now, and oil prices slipped today after increasing 6% last week. Analysts are linking supply concerns to tensions between the West and producers in Russia and Iran. Brent crude futures fell 43 cents to $74.74 a barrel, while US West Texas Intermediate crude futures were at $70.73 a barrel. That's down 51 cents. The much-anticipated film Wicked is expected to have the top-grossing opening weekend of any Broadway musical adaptation ever in North America, as well as in the UK and Ireland. The blockbuster is expected to take $114 million in North America, superseding the takings of Les Miserables, which raked in $103 million in its opening weekend in 2012. Bringing you some sports news now, and India have completed a 295-run win over Australia in the first test in Perth, continuing their incredible streak in the country. Australia were bowled out for 238 in the final session to take a 1-0 lead. It means India have now won 5 and lost just 2 of their past 9 tests in Australia. And Liverpool striker Mo Salah has said he's disappointed by the club's reluctance to offer him a new contract. The 32-year-old Egyptian is their top scorer this season, responsible for 2 goals at the weekend against Southampton. In Pakistan, tens of thousands of supporters of jailed Prime Minister Imran Khan are closing in on Islamabad, demanding he be released. Ahead of their arrival, the capital has been shut down, with Khan's supporters threatening to hold an indefinite sit-in there. Khan has been in jail for a year, but his party says the corruption charges against him are false. Hira Mustafa has more from Islamabad.
Pitched battles between supporters of Imran Khan and security teams, as security teams use tear gas shells and rubber bullets, accusing protesters of pelting stones. The first group of Khan's supporters are bearing down on the capital city. Tens of thousands more are still making their way to Islamabad from other parts of the country, even as 4,000 protesters have been detained nationwide. Imran Khan, who has been in jail since August last year, has called this a make-or-break chance for his party workers and supporters to have their voices heard.
We have responded to Khan's final call. We will march and protest in Islamabad. We will not return till we don't secure Khan's release.
Let the authorities do whatever they can to stop us. We will not back down. They have shut the country down for 3 days. They want citizens to act like slaves to their whims and directives. We will not give up till Khan walks out of jail.
Ahead of their arrival, Islamabad, a city of 1.2 million people, has been paralyzed. Authorities have barricaded the city with shipping containers. Schools are shut. Internet and data services suspended indefinitely, as thousands of soldiers in riot gear stand guard. The government accuses Imran Khan of inciting unrest, but it's citizens who are paying the price for this standoff.
The repeated protests are not only damaging the country's economy, but are also driving the nation towards instability.
On one side there is government and on the other the opposition. They must come together to resolve the political deadlock.
Imran Khan was ousted from power in 2022 and has been in jail since last year, facing more than 100 corruption charges. His party claims he's innocent and the charges are a way to keep Khan in jail indefinitely. The government and the country's powerful military deny this. Experts say the response to Imran Khan's protest call proves that the jail's leader remains immensely popular.
This protest is only the latest in a nearly year-long standoff between the government and Imran Khan's party. But the cost of this unending political standoff, experts warn, could be steep for Pakistan as the country struggles to turn its economy around. Hira Mustafa, Al Arabiya News, Islamabad.
Here's a reminder of our top stories. Israel moves closer to a ceasefire with Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's thought Israel's Security Cabinet could approve the deal tomorrow. 17 people are missing after a tourist boat sinks in the Red Sea. Russia claims Ukraine has attacked in the last 24 hours. Meanwhile, Putin's powerful Oreshnik missile wreck is analysed. And a former British Army soldier has reportedly been captured by Russia whilst fighting for Ukraine. That's all from us on W News. Thank you for joining us. Talking to you next is Hadley Gamble and then Tom Burges Watson with GNT. A very good night.
At our Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Prime Minister, I'd like to kick off by asking you to walk us through how you see the election of Donald Trump playing out in this part of the world, and specifically what it means for your government.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. Obviously, we congratulate the United States for having a successful election. This is a decision for the American people to decide what kind of a government they want. But obviously, as you said, a decision made in the United States have an effect on the globe and definitely on our region as well. We've had an experience with the previous government of President Trump. And this time also, we are hoping that the U.S. administration is going to maintain good relations with the region, with Iraq, and in particular with the Kurdistan region that's been a very credible partner with the United States in the fight against terrorism and also in promoting peace and developing the shared values and principles that we have with each other. It's a little premature to decide how it will play out. We have to wait until the whole cabinet is picked and decided, but we definitely have friends among people that we hear are being considered to be in the next government.
So you're seeing encouraging signs so far?
Well, I would like to be optimistic, yes.
In your mind, when you take a step back and think about what happens next, obviously it's difficult to foresee the next couple of years, but President-elect Trump has said that he will end all the conflicts happening right now in the world, and he specifically mentioned that in the Middle East and those in Europe. Do you believe that that's an achievable goal?
Well, I hope that there will be peaceful solutions to every ongoing conflict and war. However that's achieved, I believe it will serve the people of those countries that are suffering from the ongoing wars now. But I hope that these decisions are made in consultation with the parties involved, that the interests of the people are going to be taken into account. I don't know how this is going to be done. We hear that through force, peace can be promoted. Maybe that's the policy of this new administration. We have to wait and see. But in any case, we do believe that peace is going to be better than war anyway.
Are you worried about the possibility that Baghdad will be drawn into this conflict? We've already seen overt and behind the closed doors pressure coming from Israel towards Baghdad.
Of course we are worried and we are concerned about what's happening. We don't want Iraq to be dragged into this war. We don't think that this is an Iraqi war. We believe that if Iraq can play a constructive, positive role in promoting peace and bringing sides together, that's good. But to add fuel to the fire and to make things more complicated, to expand the war and conflict, it's not going to be in the best interest of the Iraqi people. And I hope that the Iraqi government will look at the interest of the Iraqi people more than the interest of anyone else.
President-elect Trump has made no secret of his support for Israel and its government, particularly its Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a man who has just been sanctioned by the International Criminal Court. Do you believe that will be a barrier to peace?
Well, I don't know, but I believe that any step towards promoting peace must be supported, and anything that distracts peace or any initiative should be reconsidered. So I don't know exactly how this is going to play out, but I do believe that the players must come to some agreement that there must be different ways of reaching a sustainable solution to the ongoing conflicts.
Walk me through this one. There are many schools of thought on this, but to your mind, how difficult is it going to be for Iraq, for the Iraqi people, and frankly for the stability of the region, if President-elect Trump decides to withdraw U.S. troops from Iraq?
Well, look, the U.S. troops were in Iraq based on the invitation from the Iraqi government, and there was a reason. There was ISIS, terrorism, that was threatening the security of the region and actually the security of the whole world. We have that first experience here in Kurdistan. In our Peshmergas, we're fighting ISIS, and we wanted the coalition forces, the Americans, to come to our help and assist us, and they thankfully did. There was a coalition of forces that came to support Iraq and within Iraq, Kurdistan. Now, if the overall assessment of terrorism has changed, and if Iraq believes that terrorism has come to an end, therefore we don't need American troops here, or we need to end the mission of the coalition forces. That's a different situation. And we may have different ideas, to be frank with you. We don't think that terrorism has come to an end. We think that still ISIS is intact, and they have active members. They are active in different parts of, not only in Iraq, but in the region, elsewhere in the world. And we need to have that global coalition to fight terrorism. Now, in terms of organizing or reviewing the relationship of Iraq with the coalition forces, can be different than what's been said. If the mission is no longer needed because Iraq feels it's stronger today and it can face the challenges and control the security situation in the country, that doesn't mean that the relationship between Iraq and the United States will come to an end. So ending the coalition forces or the coalition mission doesn't mean the end of U.S.-Iraqi relationship, even military relationship. So we hope that for as long as Iraq can manage its relationship with all of its partners, whether it's the United States, UK, France, Germany, Italy, any other European country, on bilateral levels, to maintain the good relations where Iraq can benefit from the friendship that is developed with all these partners, we believe that there is a way that can manage and perhaps be less risky in terms of looking at whether or not the security situation is going to be affected by the departure of the coalition forces.
Would it surprise you if U.S. troops were to stay outside of a coalition, perhaps, in some arrangement?
Whether this would surprise me? No.
No.
No. Look, U.S. is staying in many other countries in the region, not only in Iraq, but in many other Middle Eastern countries. We have U.S. forces. So it's very normal for the U.S. forces to stay in Iraq and have bilateral relations with Baghdad.
When you take a step back and look at what's happened over the last several years, the chaos that's ensued under, frankly, the leadership of the Biden administration in Washington, many people would say the catalyst for President Putin's invasion of Ukraine and what's been happening in Gaza was U.S. inaction and U.S. failure with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. In your mind, has that set a precedent for U.S. activity in the region?
Can you repeat your question?
In your mind, did the disastrous withdrawal by the Biden administration from Afghanistan set a precedent for U.S. activity in this region?
Well, I think any unilateral decision is not going to be the best decision, in my view. You know, U.S. was invited by the Iraqis, and any departure has to be mutually agreed. The mechanism, the timing, and the way that it needs to depart. But any unilateral decisions, while we have so many pressing issues, is going to cause new problems. And we've had this experience in 2011. In 2011, when the U.S. pulled out their forces, even then, we didn't think that was the best decision, and we anticipated that U.S. will come back, but at a higher cost, which was the case, because the vacuum left after the U.S. pulled out their troops was filled by ISIS and other terrorist organizations, and U.S. had to come back once again. So I hope that there are good decisions and well-calculated decisions. If U.S. wants to pull out, we need to look at what would be the alternative and how those vacuums created behind are going to be filled. We don't want to create another problem.
What's the best case scenario in your mind for your government from a Trump administration? What would you like to see them do?
In Kurdistan region? Well, we have very good relations with the United States. We want to continue having good relations. We want to continue having security cooperation. We want to continue and develop economic relations with the United States. The more development in the region means more stability, and more economic stability leads to more political stability and definitely to more security. So more U.S. engagement in the region, I believe, is going to help the region.
Talk to me about what's happening today with the oil law. What is the status of that legislation?
Iraq doesn't have an oil law. We have a law that belongs to the Saddam's era, which is designed for a central government. It doesn't help a federal system. We have a federal country today. We have a federal system. That centralized law is not helpful in organizing relations between Baghdad and Erbil. And unfortunately, after Baghdad decided to abolish all the previous laws, there is this law still in place, which is shocking. And we need to replace that with a new law. There was a draft back in 2007, but unfortunately was never passed through the parliament. We still believe that we need to have a modern law that is good for a federal system. And once we have that, I believe we can overcome many of the existing problems between Baghdad and Erbil.
Walk us through how much the failure to export is hurting your government. And I'm talking to the tune of $20 billion that you've lost so far.
Yes, almost every month we lose $1 billion. So it's over $20 billion that we've lost as a result of the export of
They're bleeding you dry.
Sorry?
They're bleeding you dry.
Well, unfortunately, this is hurting the rest of the country as well. But definitely, the biggest part of the country that's suffering is Kurdistan. Unfortunately, the losses that we have suffered are not being compensated. We see the delays in the salary payment. We see reduction in the revenues of the overall Iraqi revenues, which is not in the interest of the federal government nor in the Kurdistan region.
Yeah, Baghdad seems to characterize this shutdown of your exports as a way to assuage fears in the broader OPEC Plus group about their production concerns. And I'm talking about the fact that they want Baghdad to stick to its production numbers just like every other member of OPEC Plus is supposed to. In your mind, is that a fair assessment to put that on you?
No. Look, Iraq is producing a certain amount of oil barrels per day, and they have a quota in OPEC. But I can say that what we produce in Kurdistan is much less than what we deserve according to the percentage that Kurdistan is entitled to produce. So let's assume that Iraq is producing more than 4 million or 4.5 million barrels per day. Now the numbers have changed though. But Kurdistan is entitled to produce at least 500,000 barrels. We are producing even less than half of that. So to tell us to reduce production, it's not fair because the overall Iraqi production of oil needs to be reduced according to the quotas designed for Iraq. And it doesn't have to always come on at the cost of the production in Kurdistan.
How concerned are you by the fact that global oil production and global oil prices are frankly falling? Because that will impact your bottom line as well.
We are concerned, but let me tell you one thing. We in Kurdistan have realized that depending on oil as the only revenue for the country is always going to be problematic because the price of oil is not designed by the country. There is a global market for it. So it could go up, it could go down. When price of oil is high, then Iraq can benefit, but when it's down, it's going to affect the function of the government because the budget is not going to basically, be able to support the government's, functions. In Kurdistan, we've realized that. That's why we try to diversify our economy. We try to look at different sources of revenues to invest in agriculture, invest in different industries, invest in tourism to make sure that even if oil is no longer the only revenue or, it's not generating enough revenues for us, we have different sources of revenue. Yeah. I believe that Iraq should have done that. And we look at different parts of the world, especially the oil producers. They're using the revenues generated from oil and investing in different sectors so that to secure different sources for revenues for themselves when even oil is dried out and no longer is available. Iraq is not at that stage, and that is concerning. Mm-hmm. We are concerned about that, but we strongly encourage the federal government in Baghdad, and we certainly in Kurdistan are focusing on how we should diversify our economy to at least reduce the influence of the oil price on our economy.
There's a concern that those here in your part of the world are trucking refined product to Iran. In your mind, is that a practice that should be stopped? Because that is a country, of course, that is under international sanctions.
Well, the sanctions have been imposed, and I don't think that now there is anything legally going through Iran. So it's been stopped, after the new sanctions on the productions, not only on the oil, but on the productions has been imposed. There has been a decision not to send any of those products to Iran.
So to your knowledge, that isn't happening?
Illegally, it may be happening in some places, but not under our control.
Walk me through this. You mentioned other partners and finding other partners for investment. Obviously, the conversation earlier in the day surrounded China's influence in this part of the world, the symbiosis with the United States on multiple issues and how that's evolving and may evolve under a new administration in Washington. Does the current attitude towards China coming from Washington hurt your government in terms of investment potential?
In what sense?
Well, does it keep you from partnering with countries like China that the U.S. may have a problem with from time to time?
Look, we have good relations with the United States and with all of our Western friends. But that doesn't mean that we can't have good relations with China or any other country in the world. We have a free economy, and we are inviting anyone to come and invest in our region, and we hope that our friends would compete over who can come and invest first in Kurdistan. Yeah. But if someone doesn't want to come and invest, they shouldn't be able to stop others to come and invest.
Yeah. So a trade war with China, how does that impact you?
Well, Chinese are in Iraq and also in Kurdistan. They're already investing, and we have a law of investment, and whoever is complying and accepting our regulations and is wishing to invest in Kurdistan is welcomed.
Yeah, this has been an argument, of course, that the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Qatar have faced as well, pressure from the United States not to partner with China on a variety of issues and technologies, for example.
But to be fair, we are not being pressured to not, have investments from the Chinese by the Americans or the Western countries.
Well, how would you characterize it? Discouraged?
Well, obviously anyone would be interested in coming and investing themselves, so we encourage them to come and invest if they want to, but no one's forced us to not have relations with China if they wish to invest in our region.
Given the current state of global affairs, do you think that this will force the United States to be more pragmatic in its approach?
Well, I think they have to be, because look, Chinese are investing in the United States. Chinese are investing in Europe. Why can't they invest in our region? I mean, that's a question, right? So whenever you answer that question, I'll answer the rest of your questions.
Talk to me a bit about your relationship today with Turkey. Is that a complex relationship?
We have good relations with Turkey. We have good economic trade and relations with Turkey. We have good understanding on the security situation in the region. And we are also encouraged by the fact that Turkey is looking at different peaceful ways to sort out the problems in the region.
Yeah.
So I would characterize our relations with Turkey as good and even better.
Yeah. And Russia?
With Russia also, we have normal relations. We have Russian companies operating in Kurdistan. We have Rosneft and Gazprom Neft that are already operating in Kurdistan region and the rest of Iraq.
I want to get a sense from you of how you see the regional dynamics changing, and particularly with regards to Syria. Obviously, over the last several months, we've seen an increased number of visits between Bashar al-Assad and his partners in Saudi Arabia, his partners in UAE, things that wouldn't have happened perhaps a few years ago. And the U.S. being so tied up perhaps with other conflicts in the world and conflicts in the region, not really raising much of an eyebrow there. In your mind, are we going to see Syria reintegrated, not just regionally, but globally?
You see, when we're talking about Syria, we have to be careful about what part of Syria we're talking about. There is not one government controlling the entire territories of Syria. We have Syrian government, we have Russia, we have Iran, we have Turkey, we have the United States, we have the rest of the coalition. So we have different groups controlling different parts of the country. But if you mean the government in Damascus, we've seen that over the years, there was a maximum pressure on the government. Everybody was calling for the overthrow of the regime. And now there is, once again, reopening the channels with the government and trying to reintegrate into first to the Arab League and also to the international community. I think it depends on the cost of whatever action you take. If the decision is to overthrow the regime, you have to look at the cost of that and the meaning of what that means actually to the rest of the region and the rest of the players. And if integrating the government into the international community will bring more peace, I think that's something that I believe now many countries are looking at.
Yeah. If the Trump administration were to enact maximum pressure 2.0, for example, do you believe that would accelerate Syria's return to the international order?
I don't know about Syria, but I believe every actor has to rethink. If they want to benefit from normal relations with the United States and other players in the region, they have to perhaps revive their current policies and adopt a new policy that's acceptable. And that would go with, for Syria as well, I think.
Yeah. There's a narrative in the West that Iraq is held hostage, that Baghdad is held hostage to Iran. Is that a fair assessment? That Iraq is held hostage by Iran?
Well, that's your terminology. But, there is a lot of influence. Iran has a lot of influence in Iraq. That's true. Now, whether this is a decision that Iraqis have made or it's a decision that's been imposed, I think you better ask Baghdad that question. Is this something that they are happy with or not? But we definitely know that Iran is an important neighbor for Iraq, and it's normal for Iraq to have normal relations with Iran. Now, the level of influence and the nature of relations between Baghdad and Iran, I don't control that. You have to ask them.
I'm waiting for my invitation. Walk me through this one. When you think about what happens next with regards to the internal politics, and I'm talking about the regional dynamic, we've seen enormous strides for women made in Saudi Arabia, something that those of us who cover the region never thought perhaps we would see. We've seen women, of course, taking a major role in the UAE government, for example. Half of the parliament are women. And we see strides made for women here in your government as well. But it seems as if in Baghdad, things are really rolling back. And I'm talking about the possibility that children can be married off at the age of 9. Many in the international human rights community now say that this is tantamount to child rape. In your mind, is that worrying?
Yes. Iraq was one of the most advanced Middle Eastern countries in terms of promoting women's rights. Unfortunately, there are factors that are affecting and influencing the rights of women in countries where poverty, injustice, illiteracy is widespread. And unfortunately, over the years, Iraq hasn't been in its best capacity. We've seen that there is a lot of illiteracy, there is a lot of women that are dropping out of college and school. Definitely this is going to affect the behavior of the society and also the women themselves, the lack of confidence, and that they don't want to participate in the community. In Kurdistan, we have, I think, in a different situation. Our culture is also different. If you look at our history, women have always had greater freedom, and they have had more rights. And over the years, we have tried to give more power to women by promoting their participation in the parliament. There are many parliamentarians that are women today, and many ministers in the cabinet that are women, and many directors and many administrators that are now women. And many women are now businesswomen, very successful businesswomen. So we're trying to give equal opportunities. I'm a little sensitive about saying women's rights because I think they have to have equal rights as men, and you need to pave the road for them.
And just to be clear, that means you would advocate for equal pay for equal work?
Yes.
Every time?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that something you enforce in your government?
Well, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. In your mind, what are the things that can be used in the private sector to encourage that? And I'm talking about women on boards.
Look, you need to protect everyone's rights. Let's forget women, okay? Let's talk about citizens, humans. Everyone in the country should have equal rights. There are people who are in the public sector, there are people who are in the private sector. One of the reasons why private sector in the country has been weak, because they were afraid of retirement. In the private sector, there was no law for anyone that after a few years that they would be retired and they would have pension afterwards. Now we have passed a law in Kurdistan to secure the retirement for private sector as well. This is encouraging many people to not seek the government employment or the public sector, but to look at private sector. So if you provide more opportunities for them, if you create an environment where private sector can grow, I believe that's going to take care of many of the pressing issues that we are facing today. Not only about women, but about the whole economy.
Yeah. In your mind, what is the greatest existential threat to this region today?
Wow, this is a very tough question.
I have a reputation.
I think lack of trust. I think, history has proven that when communities don't trust each other, when systems are built on imposing ideas, when stronger players are dictating and disrespecting others, when democracy means only the rule of majority without regarding the rule of minorities, that's difficult to handle, and it's difficult to create a society where everybody would be happy. You need to feel the sense of belonging. And in order to belong to a society or to a country, you need to feel that you're equal. So the lack of equality, the lack of trust, I believe, is the source of many of the problems that we have.
How do you address that lack of trust? How do you address that lack of trust?
Reverse that. Build trust and provide, equal environments and, be just. So that's exactly what's needed. Yeah. And if we can build trust and provide equal opportunities to everyone, I think that will take care of it.
Do you still believe the United States is a partner to trust?
The United States? Yes, I do. Because, look, United States is not just about one person or one administration. United States is a successful country based on values of democracy and principles of equality and freedom. So, yes, U.S. wouldn't be successful if it wasn't a place that was built on the right foundations. And when you have institutions that endorse these foundations, needs to be trusted.
Your Excellency, thank you so much. Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Mr. President, thank you so much for joining Al Arabiya.
Thank you.
I want to kick off by asking you to give me your assessment of what's happening right now in the United States, the election of Donald Trump once again. What does that mean for Iraq?
Well, everybody's been following the United States election. What we hope to do, new administration, because we have heard so many messages from it, that he will keep peace and stability in the world. I think that's our ultimate aim from President Trump, to carry out his message and to physically implement peace and security between all the countries and resolve the conflict which we have.
Does that mean that U.S. troops should be out of Iraq?
Well, that's not a big really concerned at this stage because the world is facing bigger challenges. We have war in Europe, we have war in the Middle East, especially the Palestinian problem, and we have war in many other places in African countries. And I think Iraq, fortunately, for the last few years, we have been enjoying safe and security in Iraq. And I think our aim in Iraq and our goal in Iraq is to see peace and security between every country and to solve the conflicts which are causing too many human lives, damaging economy, even damaging trade, and creating political problems between many countries.
In your mind, what is the solution there? Because President-elect Trump has made no secret that he believes Iran is the biggest problem facing the region.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to go to that detail, but I think these problems, especially the Middle East, I believe they can be sorted out, they can be solved if there are good intentions and treat everybody on the same level. That's what I believe. Middle East is a rich area. It has got history, traditional history, number of religions, number of nationalities live in the Middle East. I think we can only live in harmony if we solve our conflicts and our problems. And I believe the conflicts in the Middle East are not unsolvable. They are solvable. They can be easily solved if good attentions and if enough attention is given to the problem for solving the problem, not encouraging the problem by the bigger powers.
Talk me through this. Benjamin Netanyahu, he's just been convicted by the ICC, the International Criminal Court. In your mind, does that affect in any way the conflict?
Well, I'm not a supporter of Netanyahu. And I think he has committed crimes on a large scale on Palestinian people. And my thoughts and my support is for Palestinian people to achieve self-determination, to be living on the area peacefully and look after their families and children. Everybody knows how many babies, how many children, how many women, how many men have been killed during this conflict.
Is he guilty of war crimes?
Well, that's not for me to say. The court has decided.
They're pushing back on that decision. They're calling it anti-Semitism.
Well, they can push back a lot of things, but the reality is in the court, and I don't think the court is biased towards any decision. I mean, this is their decision to make.
Talk me through this one. President-elect Trump is coming into office in a couple of months. He says he's going to put an end to wars, not just in the Middle East, but in Europe as well. Do you believe he has a chance of achieving that?
Well, I hope so. I hope so. I think there is a good chance for achieving that in every corner. No nation wants war.
Yeah.
They are imposed on them. So I think if President Trump is aiming for that, I wish him all the luck. And I think everybody globally will be happy about it.
You've mentioned that Iraq's had quite a bit of stability as opposed to recent decades over the last couple of years. In your mind, that obviously will bring a lot of opportunities for investment to this country.
Well, let me just say, Iraq has always been a rich country. Iraq has got the oldest history in the world regarding civilization, culture, education, and even development started over 6,000 years ago, and it has been continuous. But unfortunately, for the last nearly 50 years, Iraqi people, we have lived in conflicts. Sometimes it's been internal conflict, sometimes been outside conflicts. We experienced all of it: war, invasion, occupation, sanctions, and lately, only up to a few years ago, we experienced terrorism, which ended up by having terrorism of Daesh on large part of Iraq. But I'm glad to say we have closed that chapter. And the new chapter is we want to keep peace and security for Iraqi people, to live in harmony, and then the government has got a plan for services, for development, for investments. Yes, we need investment. Iraqi investment and outside investment.
Are you worried that Iran could pull you into the regional conflict?
No, I don't believe that they would. The relationship between Iran and Iraq is very strong. We have at least 1,200 kilometers of border. Most of the populations are relative of each other.
Yeah.
So, no, we can, I'm sure if we solve the problems, especially in the Middle East now, which is Palestinian problem. And I think this problem is not only political or military, it has become for a large population in Middle East emotional, sentimental problem. They cannot stand it to see day by day hundreds, sometimes thousands of children are killed.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to really consider that, the emotions of the people.
Yeah. Tell me this, Saudi Arabia and Iraq in recent years, not just politically but also economically, forging stronger ties, the UAE as well. The region seems to be behind a stronger Iraq, and that is a different narrative than perhaps we had heard in previous decades.
No, stronger Iraq is very important. Stronger Iraq, and Iraq, I'm glad to say, our relationship between all the Middle Eastern countries is good, and we are offering any help we can do, and at the same time we are encouraging rich Arab countries or rich individuals in Arab countries to invest in Iraq.
Baghdad's booming.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not only Baghdad, Mosul, which was controlled by Daesh for a number of years,
mm-hmm.
and they destroyed already archaeology, historical buildings. Basra is booming. Many other governments are booming, and you have seen Suleimania, Aviv, which are really in a peaceful and harmless situation. But the effect of other conflicts definitely affect the Iraqi situation.
Yeah.
On economy, on trade, on exchange of visits, on delegations.
Yeah.
These are all related to the conflicts.
In your mind, how does this square with the narrative externally that Iran is bad for Iraq? Because essentially what we've seen over the last couple of years is a more pro-Iranian government and a stable situation in the country.
To be quite honest, I think that's well over-exaggerated.
Yeah.
Because Iraqi people as a whole and Iranian people as a whole, they have lived all their history together.
Yeah.
And sometimes both countries were under the same empire.
Yeah.
There are friends and relatives in each country between. And they, not only that, they depend on trade between each other. Sometimes, for instance, recently, Iranian helped us to use our power stations using Iranian gas.
Yes.
Apart from that, about large amount of water resources are coming from Iran to Iraq.
Yes.
So we cannot close all these. Our relationship is good, and we want to keep it that way. And we hope that many other countries realize that. Now, I'm very glad to say that although we help a little bit, but the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran is improving.
Yes.
The relationship between Iran and UAE is good.
Mm-hmm.
And between the other countries, all the Arab countries But the conflict is not only in the Middle East.
Yes.
It's in Africa, in Sudan, in Yemen. Large populations are suffering from war and conflicts.
Mm-hmm. In your mind, did the conflict in Gaza actually propel more warm relations between regional countries? And I'm talking about Iraq, Iran, Saudi and Iran, UAE and Iran. Was it a catalyst?
No, I think that should be on our agenda. The agenda.
Yeah.
But we want really not good relations. We want a unity.
Yeah.
The region is strong with population, is strong with history, is strong with the number of religions, and it is strong in wealth.
Yeah.
As for agriculture, oil, natural resources are all available in the Middle East. So I think this area, if we have peaceful conditions and stability, I think it can easily be one of the richest area in the world.
And just to ask you about COP29, there's been a lot of controversy over the last couple of weeks at those meetings about whether they're going to be able to achieve a figure even of what developed countries owe the global south.
Well, environment is becoming a very serious. Climate change is becoming a very serious.
And it has direct implications for Iraq.
For everybody. Large number of countries in the world either suffer from flood or from drought or from lack of water. It's changing. Obviously, we cannot really continue using the same habit and the same behavior. We have to do something about it. Mm-hmm. And the sooner we tackle it, the better for everybody. Because just consider this here.
Yes.
How many countries suffered from flood? How many lives were lost as a result of flood? How much economical damage was caused by environmental change? So these are, we have to take it very seriously. And I'm a fully supporter of COP and their recommendations. And I hope that implementations will be implemented in every country, and every country should be responsible for implementing it. Mm-hmm. And we need the richer countries to make a program for supporting the environmental aspects and the climate change.
You're not worried that the COP process is broken?
No, I'm not worried. I think we have to do something about it. And I think it should be in our conscience and in our activity to do something about it.
Mr. President, thank you so much for joining Al Arabiya.
Okay, thank you.
Our journey of the history of Arab manuscripts has taken us to the Far East, China, and the year 105 AD. A Chinese inventor named Cai Lun created a unique way of producing paper. He used worn rags, old ropes, and tree bark to produce paper. This paper would be known as al-Kaghid. The Chinese inventor Cai Lun prepared the first paste used to make paper from woven fabric. He sliced it up and mixed it with water, and then he would press the water out. He also prepared paste for paper out of hemp pulp, bamboo, and mulberry bark. The Japanese also used natural products to make paper. There are many stories about how paper arrived to Arab countries. However, most of them overlap with the possibility that in the summer of 134 Hijri, the Arabs captured some Chinese people in one of their battles in Central Asia and took them to Samarkand. These Chinese individuals knew how to make paper, and they taught the Arabs. Al-Kaghid is an Arabized word for paper. It is said to be a Persian word of origin, and there is a possibility that it is a Chinese word in origin. The manufacturing of Kaghid paper was very meticulous and took several days to finalize. White hemp, which is a fibrous plant, would have its threads and fibers extracted from its bark to manufacture paper. The hemp would be soaked in water, then combed down with a brush until it softens. Lime water is then added, which involves using a white substance prepared by heating limestones in special kilns. It is then left to cool and have the water drained from it. The water is used to soak the hemp for several nights. The soft fibers are pressed and placed under the sun to dry. At night, the fibers are returned to the lime water once again, and left again till the morning to be pressed once again. This process goes on for 3 or more nights, till the fibers whiten. They would replace the lime water twice a day. After the fibers would dry, they were cut with specialized tools. They were then soaked in fresh water for 7 days. And this water would be changed daily until the lime water residue would wash out. The fibers would be pressed delicately in a mortar and pestle, or moist, until they flattened out, and there were no knots left. The paste would be dissolved in a bit of clean water until it became similar to fine silk. Special wooden molds were made for the paper, depending on the requests of those who ordered them to be made. And it would contain many holes. The mold would be covered in water, and the paste would be placed on the mold. And it would be evened out by hand to have an equal thickness throughout the mold. The mold is inverted onto a wet wooden board, which it would stick to, and it would be left to dry until it would fall off on its own. The wooden board would be sprinkled with water, and once it dried up slightly, the first side of the paper would be coated with a hemp mixture. The first side is placed on a wooden board, and the other side is coated in the same manner. When soaking and starching al-Kaghid paper, they would use rice starch after boiling and cooking it in a clean pot, draining it with a clean cloth, and using it to soak the paper. The more the process was repeated, the more aged and refined the paper would become. To color paper, they would add saffron to the starch solution, pour it into a bowl, and then gently dip the paper into the solution so that it would not crumble. The paper would then be dried on a fine thread in a shady area and flipped several times until it dries. It is finally polished with a glass polisher. This paper would be finally ready to be used. Paper is characterized by being lightweight, small in size, portable, and affordable. These factors made it a mainstay of expressing intellectual findings and thought. It was used in the art of calligraphy, especially in the Islamic East. All of this made al-Kaghid paper a strong competitor to papyrus and parchment. The Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid ordered that people only write on al-Kaghid paper, and that was because leathers were capable of being erased and reused, which made them susceptible to forgery. This is contrary to paper, which would be ruined if someone tried to erase something off of it. If a person tried to scrape or rub off something, then markings would be evident. In addition to its other advantages, paper was widely used in writing manuscripts. Despite the use of parchment attempting to hold on to its relevancy, it became one of the tools of scholars, commoners, students of knowledge, writers, merchants, paper makers, and those of prestige and power. Al-Jahiz said the following about paper: "It is sufficient for a person to carry a little bit of paper with their belongings and provisions due to how lightweight and small it is, unlike leather, which is heavier. If a person wanted to carry enough to last the duration of their travels, it would not suffice to carry a camel's worth." The Egyptian publishing house has one of the earliest books to be copied onto paper. It is a manuscript titled The Risala in Fiqh by al-Shafi'i, and it dates back to the beginning of the 3rd century Hijri. The oldest Arab manuscript written on paper, according to the latest data, is the Etiquette of Philosophy by the writer Hunayn bin Ishaq, who passed away in the year 260 Hijri. This manuscript is still preserved in the library of the University of Tehran, and it dates back to 249 Hijri. With the increase in demand for paper, the number of centers that produced it increased, and it was no longer confined to Samarkand or Baghdad. The paper industry reached Transoxiana, the Levant in Damascus, Tiberias, and Tripoli. Samarkand remained a central hub for the production of paper, and they continued to produce the finest and most premium types of paper. This new human invention and the drive Arabs had to produce it led to many forms of paper being developed, including al-Sulaymani, al-Talhi, al-Nuhi, al-Faruni, al-Jafari, and al-Tahri. All of these names were given in relation to the governor of the city in which the paper was made. The development of the paper industry, especially al-Kaghid, and its spread throughout Islamic countries, invigorated the production of written artworks and authorship, and helped it transcend into a new era. It was accompanied by a development in the markets of papermaking, scribes, calligraphy, and calligraphers. All of this changed the course of Arab manuscripts, as they were elevated to a level with increased competition after the diversification and growth of this world that is full of art and intellectual creativity. This made us delve further into exploring the depths of our manuscripts, to stand at the tools of the greats of our history, as they explored, mastered, and created.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics, and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake, and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday right here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on the programme, Russia claims its forces have shot down 8 ballistic missiles launched by Ukraine during the past 24 hours. That's according to state media. Meanwhile, a far-right NATO critic who wants to end support for Ukraine has won the most votes in a shock election result in Romania. It's been 18 years since the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko, a former Russian spy who, on his deathbed, accused President Vladimir Putin of orchestrating the attack against him. Today, his wife, Marina Litvinenko, joins us on the show from London. The selection process for US President-elect Donald Trump's top team is now complete, with a few surprises in the mix. And reports suggest that Israel has tentatively agreed to a US-brokered ceasefire with Hezbollah, but key issues remain. Well, Israel's National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir is warning that a Lebanon ceasefire would be, quote, a big mistake. Hello and welcome to the programme. First of all, the Kremlin says it is not well acquainted with the views of a Romanian hard-right NATO critic who's likely to take part in an 8th of December presidential runoff vote. Well, the presidential race is being closely watched well beyond Romania, which shares a 650-kilometre-long border with Ukraine. Well, Romania is seen by Western allies as playing a key role in hosting a NATO military base. Well, Kalin Georgescu's success in the first round of presidential voting was unexpected and threatens Romania's staunchly pro-Ukraine stance. Well, the Kremlin spokesman says that while they're unsure of Georgescu, Moscow's stance is that Romania's leadership is hostile to Russia. Meanwhile, Russia has shot down 8 ballistic missiles fired by Ukraine. This as tensions rise over Kyiv's use of Western-supplied long-range arms against Russia. Well, earlier, Ukrainian drones hit a fuel and energy facility in the Russian region of Kaluga. Meanwhile, Ukrainian authorities are saying that a Russian missile strike has wounded nearly 24 people in the eastern city of Kyiv. Well, Moscow says it's launched 145 drones at Ukraine during the course of the night. Meanwhile, 30 ships that belong to Russia have been sanctioned by the British government. London says they are part of Russia's shadow fleet. Well, the total number of Russian vessels under restriction by London now stands at 73. Well, the British Foreign Secretary David Lammy calls the measures the UK's biggest sanction package. Well, the tankers and cargo ships are used by Moscow to export oil, which in turn funds its war against Ukraine. Well, for more, we can cross now to Kyiv and speak to Sergei Petukhov, who is the former Deputy Minister of Justice for Ukraine. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us, Sergei. It's 1 degree centigrade in Kyiv today. Winter has clearly arrived there. And I'm just wondering what your assessment is of the situation on the battlefield as we head into winter.
Well, it's the third winter of war in Kyiv, and this is definitely a harsh one. We're expecting a lot of electricity cuts all over Ukraine, and the attacks by the Russian missiles and Russian drones are being very intensive lately. So, of course, that means that everybody in Ukraine feels what the war is. And on the battlefields, while Ukraine has been retreating for the last several months, for now, at least, the front has been, upheld, and the retreat is rather tactical, and no catastrophe has happened yet.
And as you said, it's the third winter on the battlefield for Ukraine and for Russia in this war. I mean, what tends to happen, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that during the winter months, both sides get frozen into their positions. Is that a correct assessment, and is that likely to happen again this winter?
I'm not a military specialist, and I cannot really comment on that. But yeah, surely, if the winter is harsh, it really slows down the progress. And when the temperatures are going below zero, that's a very different situation from a comfortable temperature. Right now, the weather is not too cold, and I don't think that it plays a major role in the war, especially given that the main reason why Russians are advancing is their ability to cover the huge areas of Ukrainian territory by their artillery strikes and also gliding bombs. So these are the things that are not that dependent on the weather, really.
And for the Ukrainian people, obviously, a third long winter ahead. Have people, do you think, got used to making adequate preparations, provisions, contingency plans, especially because, energy infrastructure does come under quite consistent attack. And that, of course, would mean no heating and no electricity.
Well, absolutely. I mean, people are mentally prepared. This is the third time, so there's no shock when things go bad. And many people and businesses have some sort of arrangements to survive those long periods without electricity and heating. Some people would have electric accumulators. The businesses would, buy the diesel generators. People would try to move to the areas where, they feel safer. And the government tries to establish certain points where the heating and electricity is provided for people to survive the harshest points of the war. So in this respect, I think the people have learned to become resilient to those type of hardships and manage to continue their lives to the extent possible.
And how would you say morale is bearing up, given that it is, as I said, the third winter and there have been some setbacks on the battlefield? I mean, how are people feeling at this stage?
Well, it's definitely not easy to live in this full-scale war situation for the third year. Not that much the electricity cuts, people are quite used to that, but the casualties at the battlefield and the reality of the Russians, reinforced by the North Korean troops, North Korean bombs, and Iranian-made drones makes it harsh for people to accept the reality. But I think there's understanding that we do need a game changer to be able to overcome the Russians. We do need a stronger support from our Western allies, and only all those things combined can let us win this war.
Well, according to Moscow, Russian forces shot down 8 ballistic missiles that were launched by Ukraine. This all happened in the last 24 hours. And for his part, President Zelensky is saying that more than 460 drones and 20 missiles were used against Ukraine during the course of the last week. I'm just wondering whether it feels to you on the ground, whether it feels like, this war has entered a more intense phase.
It definitely has, and I think that the decision of United States, United Kingdom, and France to allow Ukraine to use its missiles, against the military infrastructure of Russia within Russia is new development, something that we've been pleading for a long time, and something that can give us some sort of upper hand in stopping those advances. I do believe that the Putin will not negotiate out of this weaker position. He will always try to have the upper hand, and in order to make him sit at the table of negotiations, Ukraine needs to have certain trumps in its head. So one thing is the Kursk region that is being occupied by Ukraine. The other thing is the damage to the military and supporting military infrastructure that is possible now with the decision to fire the ballistic missiles within the Russian territory. So all those things, although they bring the intensification of the conflict, in the real time, they also can bring peace negotiations closer because, when Putin senses that he's losing the ground, he might be more willing to concede some of his positions and reach some sort of armistice, at least, that is, necessary to stop those victims of war that are happening every day, especially that Russians are targeting civilian infrastructure. And, every night we have casualties in different Ukrainian cities when the Russian drones hit the residential complexes, buildings, civilian infrastructure, and routinely people get killed or maimed in those attacks. So this is something that we want to stop. And for that, I think the intensification of the conflict brings us closer to some sort of balance in the negotiation positions and bring this kind of equality at the negotiation table that is necessary to be able to reach an armistice.
Yeah, I want to talk to you a bit more about negotiations in just a moment, and in particular what Donald Trump's return to the White House might mean for this war and for Ukraine. But I wanted to ask you a bit more just about the situation on the ground first, because Moscow clearly angered at the use of these Western-supplied long-range weaponry against Russia. And in turn, Russia has been using some pretty heavy weaponry of its own, notably in Dnipro. They used an experimental hypersonic missile. I'm just wondering how significant you think that is.
I mean, we are used to Russians sending any type of missiles that they have against Ukrainians. Actually, Ukraine has previously used the Western weapons against what Russia claims to be its territory, in particularly the occupied Crimea, which has a lot of military aims there, military infrastructure. So from Ukrainian perspective, this is not nothing new, really, that scares us that much. Whereas the Russians, I think, have been saying that there's lots of red lines that should not be crossed, but they never reacted really in any meaningful way when those imaginary red lines were crossed. So this time they started showing some sort of, they're hinting that they might use the nuclear weapons against Ukraine if there's any escalation further going on, how they perceive it. I think this is a bluff. I don't think that that would make any sense for Russia to apply the nuclear weapons. So the only reason for them launching this attack is sending a signal to the Trump administration, trying to scare them into accepting the Russians' win in Ukraine. And I don't think that this is going to work. We've seen the Trump administration being hard on Russia before. Trump administration authorized the provision of lethal weapons to Ukraine as far away as 2017. I do believe that the new administration will bring a new impetus to the peace talks, and Ukrainian authorities are already refining their messages to appeal to the priorities of the Trump administration, trying to show that the stronger Europe and win in Europe over Russia is in American interests, that applying the and usage of American weapons is a strong message to Russia and is also good for American economy and American jobs. And I think those messages will work also for the Trump administration. And basing on the historical hard positions of Republican Party against Soviet Union and then Russia, I think that all the efforts of the Trump administration will only work and will only be directed to a strong position of the US and NATO in Ukraine, and trying to find a durable solution that will permanently strengthen Europe rather than weakening it by giving extra concessions to Russia.
Yeah, indeed. We've heard from the incoming Trump administration, Mike Waltz, the new national security advisor who's been chosen for that job. He said we need to discuss who's at the table, whether it's an agreement or an armistice, and also what's the framework of an eventual deal. And on the Russian side, we're hearing from the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, saying we're ready for dialogue. And I'm just wondering whether you think Kyiv is really ready and willing to engage in dialogue at this stage.
I think so, and the President Zelensky has signaled that repeatedly in his interviews to different medias. I think the Ukrainian red flags would be a legal concession of its territory or parts of its territory, so this is definitely not on the table. However, the president made a statement that he does not believe that Ukraine should militarily try to regain all of its territories and believes that Crimea can be returned diplomatically. So what that means, there's a ground for some sort of armistice, which would recognize the situation on the ground to a certain extent and freeze the conflict by giving, the security guarantees to Ukraine and possibly providing some sort of enforcement mechanism on this contact line. If that is something that is, will be crystallized in the minds in Moscow and Washington, then I think this kind of agreement has a good chance of being accepted by Ukrainians. After all, it's not just the president of Ukraine that decides. Given the extent how Ukrainians suffered in this war, any agreement or armistice will have to be accepted by Ukrainian society. So the Ukrainian society will be the judge of whether this agreement will work for Ukrainians. And I think with sort of serious security guarantees and stability, Ukrainians will be able to accept that as the reality that we're living in.
Okay. I just want to ask you about one last thing before we leave you. Romania shares a 650-kilometre long border with Ukraine. And during the weekend, there was a surprise outcome in the first round of the presidential election. A pro-Russian independent by the name of Kalin Georgescu claimed the lead in round one, looking likely to be on track to be Romania's next president. And I'm just wondering whether you think that puts Romania's support for your country, and I gather it's been significant support, in jeopardy.
I will not speculate at the outcome of the elections until they are official, but in any case, Romania is the NATO member state. Romania has fundamentally interests that are different from the ones of the Russians. Russia and Soviet Union at its time occupied part of Romania and made it a Soviet Republic of Moldova. And to this point, Russia is destabilizing the situation in Moldova, which is right at the border with Romania. So I don't think that individuals will be able to shift that fundamental interest of Romania of ensuring the stability of its border and its neighbors. And Ukraine is also a neighbor of Romania, as you rightly stated. So I don't think that we should really worry about that. Romania has been, a good NATO ally, has been always performing its obligations, has supported Ukraine unequivocally, both in terms of political support, but also militarily. Romania is the place where the Ukrainian pilots are trained to use the Western aircrafts. So I don't think that any outcome of the elections will change that, because it is in the fundamental interests of Romania to have a strong Ukraine, a stable Moldova at its borders, and a strong NATO alliance.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Sergei Petukhov. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Now, just to remind you, on the 23rd of November 2006, the former KGB agent Alexander Litvinenko was poisoned by a cup of tea at a London hotel. Well, on his deathbed, he blamed the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Well, Litvinenko, who had worked for the Soviet KGB and its successor, the FSB, fell out of favor with the Russian authorities after allegedly refusing to kill the oligarch Boris Berezovsky. Well, arrested multiple times, he fled Moscow in the year 2000 and sought asylum in the United Kingdom, where he became one of Putin's most vocal critics. Well, the 18th anniversary of his death was marked during the course of the weekend. Well, we can cross now to London and speak to Marina Litvinenko, the widow of Alexander Litvinenko, who was killed almost exactly 18 years ago. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been 18 years since your husband was killed. Just tell us, first of all, how did you mark that anniversary?
You said it's 18 years since my husband was killed here in London, and I think it was mostly one of the first serious attack outside of Russia and killing enemies or oppositioner of Putin. But now in 18 years, we have more and more people who've been killed or died because they've been against of Vladimir Putin. This was a very quiet day for two of us, for me and for our son, Anatoly. And we went to cemetery and just tried to remember my husband and his father as a very good man. And I can't believe it's soon almost 20 years since he died.
Indeed, it doesn't feel like so very long ago that we were covering that story in the media. Of course, you live in London and you continue to speak out against President Vladimir Putin, whom your husband blamed for his death before he actually died from his poisoning. Just tell us a little bit about the sort of activities and the kind of activism you're engaged in.
it was even not activism. I think it was my right to understand who killed my husband. And it was not possible to bring this case to the proper court because people who was named as a first suspect were in Russia. And Putin immediately refused to extradite them to UK. And of course, they didn't want to go themselves. And only way was to bring this case to inquest or to public inquiry. And it did happen in 10 years after my husband, Alexander Litvinenko, was killed in 2015. And only in 2016, we had a verdict. It means all these 10 years, I didn't feel myself as an activist, but as a person who fight the truth and to understand how president of a big country as Russia might be a criminal. He was pointed in a public inquiry report. He was not named as a person who killed my husband, but he's definitely responsible for my husband's death and for use of radioactive material, polonium-210. And is it not a proper, maybe, verdict? But one day after what Putin done during this almost 25 years being as a head of Russia, this will be one part of this huge case against Vladimir Putin.
And before he was poisoned, your husband said that Putin will start a war, millions of people will die, he said. He also said words to the effect that this monster, talking about Vladimir Putin, must be stopped. I'm just wondering what it was about that angered Moscow so much and what you think he envisaged happening as the years went by.
It was a lot of things what or irritated or became angry with my husband. But Sasha, my husband, always said, this is people that are criminals. They don't care about state. They don't care about people in Russia. They mostly care about money and power and controlling this criminal business. And if you started to do something what this business might be cut or compromise, they might kill you. And this is exactly what happened to any other people as my husband, Alexander Litvinenko, but they tried to stop. I can't call this as even corruption. This was like an international crime. They tried to corrupt people all around the world. And this is, we see what is happening now during this war against Ukraine. How is this everything difficult? And knowledge of my husband as a former security officer was very important here in UK or in Europe to explain this. And I think it became as a very special point why he was killed at the end.
And obviously predicting a war in which millions of people were killed, which were the words that your husband used before he was died. Do you think he envisaged that the day that would come, that the situation we're in now, that there would be a war between Russia and Ukraine involving the West to a significant degree?
It's very difficult to make any prognosis. Only things what I always try to say, Putin tried to bring as many countries involved in this situation. And countries as United States, United Kingdom, and European Union, they just too long waiting for reaction. If it's all happened in 2022, when Putin just started this war and stopped him and provide all weapons what Ukraine was needed, it would be finished much sooner. And not so many people might die, and so many children might die. And now we can see how more and more people dying in this war. And this situation would be worse if, again, European countries and United States will started to calm down Putin or trust him for what he is saying. Putin must be stopped. And Ukraine, what is fighting already for almost 3 years, need to be supported, and it's not going to be any third world war if it will be finished sooner as possible.
But of course, the Biden administration and it seems the United Kingdom as well have given Ukraine permission to use some very significant weaponry in the last couple of weeks. And that's obviously angered Russia. President Putin has issued some pretty chilling warnings about where things could head to from here. How seriously do you think we should take those warnings?
But this was from a very beginning. When this war started, Putin tried to frighten all leaders, saying it's my game. I'm fighting against Ukrainian Nazis, how he called them. But of course, we know it was not any Nazis. And he already said you might use nuclear weapon because we already developed a lot of new missiles, but it never happened. Even after Ukrainian army just went to Russian territory and now almost 3 months staying in this part of Russia. And this has never happened. Why now you have to believe Putin will use this nuclear weapon after what never happened before? I think, he tried to push leaders, he tried to push ordinary people and make them feel frightening to say this because his own situation is not perfect. Russian economy was not prepared for this long war. They might do this for a few months, maybe for 1 year. But even they try to change economy to military type, again, it doesn't work properly. Why they always need a new people or soldiers from, now we know, from North Korea, some of them from Africa, because they don't have enough people in a front line first, and they don't have enough people working in the factories. And this is a real situation of Russia. And for Putin, it's better maybe to stop this war, but in a position what suits him. He doesn't want to give up territory what he already occupied. He even wants to take a bigger part, and he needs to present to all Russian people inside of Russia it's his victory. And to make this, he needs to stop UK, United States, France to supply Ukraine with these weapons.
So is that how you see things heading to from here? Do you think a negotiated settlement is the most likely way forward for Ukraine? And I also want to ask you what you think the advent of Donald Trump on the scene would mean for such a negotiated settlement.
Again, I would be the last person who will try to predict what Donald Trump will do, because it's, of course, his decision might be a last, but it's every time depending to his advisors. And we need to see who's around him and what kind of advice he might receive. And he obviously less politician, but more businessman. And he will calculate what's a way would be a more profited for him. And this is all my answers for now. We don't know what situation might be preferent for Donald Trump.
You've said that President Putin wants to sow fear and disunity amongst Ukraine's allies. How much success do you think he's having in this regard?
Again, from very beginning, it was not real allies. It was not real consolidation of countries against this war. And this is what was not happened. This was supposed to be finished just in a few months after this all consolidation. This is always calculation. How long Ukraine will survive, or Putin will use nuclear weapon or not. And this is always delayed. But this is exactly what Putin wanted. It's his always strategy to make people or countries to be against each other, not doing work together. And now, actually, we have another very serious situation. We can call this like a proxy war. And he used some, of course, not Putin personal, but the system tried to use a different type of destabilization in the different countries. No, for example, today morning, we have an aircraft in Lithuania, in the Baltic countries, collapse. This was business jet, DHL. But we know a similar situation happened in UK, but not with a jet, but with some office when again DHL was under, I would say, attack because parcel was just exploded, and we still don't know what happened with this jet with DHL in Vilnius. And this is all strategy what Putin's system tried to use against civilization, to feel people insecure, unsafe. And what I say, consolidation and union of this country against Putin as evil. I don't have another word about him, how he all doing now against all world, just to stop.
Yeah, and of course we've had the head of MI5 in the United Kingdom, the domestic intelligence agency, saying that Putin's henchmen, he says, want to cause chaos on the streets of the UK and of Europe. I mean, do you think that's something that can and will really happen?
No, it did happen, and we have some already result and hackers attack and some Russian hackers behind of this. What I said happened to DHL, and even hooligans. They might be locals, but they would be used by this Russian security service to destabilize this situation. Even provocative involvement to different meetings of protest. Again, this might be some trace of Russian security service. And this is, we're allowed to do this. It's like an illness. If you don't have a very strong treatment, immediate, maybe very, again, what I say, strong, illness will not finish. Everything what we're doing, we just a small portion, but not enough to treat this illness. Because Putin is a real illness. Because what I see now, it's like a metastase. If you don't treat cancer properly, you have a metastase in your whole body. And what he tried to do now.
What is the state of the opposition in Russia today? Because, of course, Alexei Navalny died earlier this year. Is there anything left of the opposition?
Alexei Navalny was definitely the most prominent and powerful oppositioner, but not alone. He was just the most, what I said, well-known. But opposition in Russia was destroyed many years ago. And we never, since beginning Putin in the power, we didn't have a proper opposition presenting in the parliament. This opposition might make any change. We can call this system opposition. Any other opposition was not system. They could go for protest in the streets. They might try to be elected to the local, to council or some parliaments of towns or cities, but not a bigger result opposition could achieve being in Russia. And particularly after war started in 2014, I would like to mention, with the Crimea invasion and all this activity in the east of Ukraine, Putin started to squeeze opposition more and more. And any change to do in Russia was not possible. Some people escaped, some people been arrested, some people been killed, as Alexei Navalny. This is what we all say about opposition. And now I believe any person who against the war, who disagree with what Putin is doing, is opposition. And if you still be a normal and not supporting this war, you might be this power. And now it looks like to be Russian and save your normality. It means opposition now.
The only other person in the world who probably understands the situation that you've been through, the pain you've been through, the only other parallel I can think of is Yulia Navalnaya, the widow of Alexei Navalny. And I'm just wondering whether you've maintained contact with her and whether you see her having a role going forward and really carrying on the work of her husband.
This is a lot of similarity and difference. Of course, I feel so sorry for Yulia Navalny, who was very supportive to her husband, but I don't think she ever expected to be a leader of opposition. I still don't know if it's her choice or she could not say no to all supporters of Alexei Navalny. But it means she's very brave, because it's not so long since Alexei Navalny died, and her decision was almost immediate to start this new position. And again, for what I could say, it's just I wish her success, and if she would be able to consolidate people around her. But again, I don't think we all need to find any leader. You have to keep these all right things inside of you and doing even little things, but what might change something in the future. But for young people, maybe it's very important to consolidate around somebody. If there's any activities, as for example was a march of peace in Berlin and on 17th of November, again, is good. If people might find somebody who is a similar or believes to similar things, it's okay, it's good, it's right.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there because we're out of time, but I really want to thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Marina Litvinenko. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
The US President-elect Donald Trump has finished picking his top team ahead of the inauguration in January, with some names raising eyebrows in DC and abroad. A few of the picks are return appointments, like Sebastian Gorka in a counterterrorism role, whilst others, like Brooke Rollins for Agriculture Secretary and Howard Lutnick for Commerce Secretary, are long-time Trump allies. Well, in the latest round, more loyalists take up key roles, including Russell Vogt, who is co-author of the controversial Project 2025 initiative, to lead the Office of Management and Budget. While taking it to Truth Social, Trump says that Russell will dismantle the deep state and end weaponized government. However, Trump's Treasury pick, Scott Bessent, is seen as more neutral, deviating from the characteristics of the rest of the cabinet. Well, for more, I'm joined by Republican strategist Angie Wong. Angie, thank you very much indeed for being with us once again here on Al Arabiya News. Seems the selection process for Donald Trump's top team is complete. One of the last nominees being the former NFL player Scott Turner, who's going to lead the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I mean, fair to say Donald Trump has surprised us right to the last.
He really has. We were expecting that job to go to Ben Carson, who has been a Trump loyalist, and he had that job in the previous administration. So, yeah, he's shaking things up a bit.
He is. And Scott Turner worked, I gather, for a software company in a position where his title was Chief Inspiration Officer. And I'm wondering how you think that's going to help him in his new capacity. And what do you think he brings to the team?
Well, I mean, certainly it's a younger look for the Trump administration. And, you know, clearly, if you look across the board on his entire cabinet, it really is like the Rainbow Coalition. You have every walks of life of American life there. Remember, it was just a few days ago that Mark Cuban said Trump doesn't know any intelligent, strong women. Well, here in his cabinet, you have over 5 very strong, very intelligent women picks. So I think he's done a fantastic job. You know, there's been a lot of naysayers saying, well, you know, Trump's cabinet picks won't get Senate confirmation, but I don't see why not. I mean, these are very highly qualified people who have joined the cabinet. And yeah, there are some controversial ones for sure. But after a few days of hearings with the Senate, I have no doubt that they will get passed.
OK, just looking beyond their qualifications, I mean, do you think there are any sort of overarching themes or characteristics that you could say are common to the average member in the incoming Trump administration?
There's really no average in this administration whatsoever. The one thing that I do know when speaking with the Trump team is that they did not want any lobbyists on board. They didn't want anyone going to Washington with an IOU already in place. And a lot of the picks are all Trump loyalists. They have shown their loyalty to Trump over the years. And they're also very effective leaders. And I think that is what Trump was looking for. Not so much about what they look like, what they represent. But, they're all very well media trained. If there was one trait, I would say they can definitely jump on television shows all day long and carry out his agenda. The other thing that the Trump team had mentioned to me was that they realize they have a very short period of time to get all of Trump's agenda through. So they know that just around the corner, there's probably another boogeyman or another media scandal or something that will trip Trump up. Because remember, just in a very short few months, what we have here is the midterm elections, and that's going to be for Congress and some of the Senate seats. So there's a lot to do in a very short period of time. And I think all of these leaders that Trump has chosen, they'll effectively get his agenda passed.
Let's talk for a moment about Donald Trump Jr., because quite a lot of reports are suggesting he's been extremely busy behind the scenes, some suggesting he's been the most influential person in the incoming transition, in the transition team. And I just want to ask you what you make of that, whether you think perhaps that's been exaggerated.
Well, Donald Trump Jr. has been very effective during the campaign, and he's always worked behind the scenes. Remember, there's a lot to do behind the scenes. Trump is a great talking piece. He's a great entertainer, and he's a great politician and retail politician. But more importantly, there's just a lot of stuff that happens behind the scene that nobody wants to see how the sausage is made. And Donald Trump Jr. and the rest of his family, they've been very, very busy putting together this current administration. They have great relationships, obviously, with all the picks. Most importantly, it was told to me that Donald Trump Jr. was the one who chose J.D. Vance, right, to be vice president. And he really pushed that through. And clearly the father listens to the son. I mean, this is the next generation of Republicans. And that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing very strong, we're seeing young energy, and we're seeing a very fluid administration in that it just represents the right vibes, if to pull a word from Kamala Harris's book. And I think that is exactly what we're going to get. We're going to get a lot of positive energy going forward.
Yeah, and of course there must be an element of thinking forward to 2028 as well. And maybe I'm getting carried away with this, but Donald Trump is going to be 82 years old in 2028, the next time the US goes to the polls. And I'm wondering whether you think it's going to have a Trump ticket on it in the form of Donald Trump Jr.
Possibly. I mean, 2028 is too far away. We know that J.D. Vance is going to make a run of it, but we'll see who's jumping in. I'm hearing even rumors that AOC, that's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's thinking about jumping in. She's the radical congresswoman from Queens, New York. So it all depends on who's on the ticket. It doesn't look likely that Donald Trump Sr. is going on because he's already had his 2 terms, unless, things dramatically changes in Congress. I don't know if Donald Trump Jr. has any aspirations to be president. I think he really does enjoy being the kingmaker. And I think he really enjoys working with everyone that he's assembled. I mean, there is something to be said that this is Donald Trump Jr.'s team. This is his A-team.
You mentioned loyalty a little bit earlier on, and the fact that many of those who've been chosen are labelled as loyalists. During the weekend, we heard the former President Bill Clinton telling MSNBC that Trump was all about loyalty. He says he's interested in people who are loyal to him 100% of the time, no matter what the issue, no matter what the facts are, no matter who gets hurt. Do you think that's a little bit harsh?
I mean, I've heard that as well, but I also know that Donald Trump chose Susie Wiles to be his chief of staff because Susie Wiles can say no to him, right? It's not necessarily just being absolute loyal to someone. It's actually doing right by that person. And I think that he does surround him. He knows who the yes people are around him. And yeah, you could call them loyalists, but I have a different definition for that. They're just yes men, right? If you have the country's interest in your own heart, and also Donald Trump's interest and his family's, then you're going to push back when you need to push back. And that's what Susie Wiles and other nominees for the cabinet have been able to do. They know how to speak to Donald Trump. They know how to sway him if necessary, and they know how to talk sense with him. And he really does enjoy a good business sense. Sometimes it really boils down to that. It's not about politics. It's about a good business deal. Remember, this is the art of the deal guy.
I'm assuming from our earlier conversation, Angie, that you breathed a little bit of a sigh of relief when it was announced that Matt Gaetz was not going to be, he was pulling out of the race. What went through your mind?
I think when we last spoke, Tom, I pretty much knew that Matt Gaetz had no pathway to actually being confirmed in the Senate. I think that was, speaking of loyalty with Trump wanted to see who was going to be loyal to him on Matt Gaetz, who was almost an impossible pick. I mean, the whole entire political world in Washington and elsewhere, we all finally were able to breathe when Matt Gaetz walked away from that post. So I think it was a great test from Donald Trump to see who fell in line with his thinking, no matter how radical. And it was also great to see Matt Gaetz learn, well, how much Washington hated him. Ultimately, that's what we're learning. This morning, I'm hearing that he's considering a run for the Florida governorship. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, given that your powers of prediction have been so astute up until this point, I'm just wondering whether there's anybody else at this stage that you're worried about that you think is going to struggle to make it through the Senate hearing process.
I actually expect the Senate process to be pretty swift. In fact, it was Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania who came out to say there's no drama here. I mean, Trump's picks are pretty good, and he's quite open-minded about this. And I think he understands the wave that just happened, which is, look, Trump just won the White House, the Senate, and also the Congress, and he got the popular vote. So you can't really go against the tide. It would be really difficult to do. The media has thrown out a few names to be worried about, but I don't really see troubles ahead. I do see, maybe some longer Senate confirmations, longer than usual, because people like to grandstand, especially when the cameras are on them. But I don't believe there's going to be any real surprises. I think he's going to get the majority of his picks. There may be one or two switch outs, but probably not, because again, the transition team has done a wonderful job in picking the next cabinet. So I think we're going to see an easy and smooth transition in January.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed. I'm sure we'll speak before then. Angie Wong, great to have you with us as ever.
Thank you.
Now, it's been a week since the US Special Envoy Amos Hochstein said that a truce in Lebanon was, quote, within reach. So what is the latest? Well, despite reports circulating over the weekend that Israel had agreed to a US-backed ceasefire with Hezbollah, a US official confirms this is not actually the case. He added that while some progress has been made, all the parties are still not quite there yet, and that certain sticking points remain. Well, despite ongoing diplomatic efforts, Israel has intensified its attacks on Lebanon. A recent Israeli strike on an army center between Tyre and Naqoura killed a Lebanese soldier and left 18 others injured. Meanwhile, Lebanon has condemned today's attack on a UNIFIL base in the south of the country, which left 4 Italian peacekeepers with minor injuries. Well, for more on this, we can cross to Lebanon and speak to Michel Halou, who is the Secretary General of the Lebanese political party, the National Bloc. Thank you very much indeed for joining us once again. I just want to start by asking about these reports that Israel is moving towards a ceasefire deal with Hezbollah. I want to ask you how hopeful you are about this and when we might see a result.
Thank you so much for having me first, Tom. Look, the reports seem to be quite serious, much more serious than the first 2 times where it was not really clear whether there would be a ceasefire, in a sense that we've had already attempts to reach a ceasefire late September and then again late October, but it didn't seem really serious. This time, it seems like it's much more advanced. Now, this is obviously welcome because the situation is quite dramatic. We're talking about 3,500 casualties, Lebanese people killed by the Israeli army. We're talking about close to 15,000 injured people. We're talking about 1.2 million internally displaced people, an economy in shambles, a society that has been, completely destroyed, let's say, or a society that has been, that has gone immense and tremendous amount of changes and extremely difficult challenges over the last month. Now, the real question is not just, will there be a ceasefire? There might be a ceasefire. The question is, how long will the ceasefire last? And will this ceasefire be a sustainable ceasefire? Because what we're looking at is not just that we stop this war, but it's also that we make sure that this war is the last one. And when you look at the terms of the ceasefire, which are basically a 60-day period, 60-day ceasefire that will allow Hezbollah to withdraw north of the Litani, and then only after that, the Israeli would be able to withdraw south to leave the country. And at the same time, there's a committee that is supposed to be set up, ran by the US, some sort of an oversight committee, but that will also allow Israel to strike anytime they want if they believe that there's a threat. Okay. And at the same time, there's no specific requirement from Hezbollah to hand its weapon to the Lebanese army, which means that the Lebanese army will remain in a difficult situation between Hezbollah and the role that it's supposed to play as a defender of Lebanon's sovereignty. So it seems that fighting might stop, but are we reaching a full-fledged stable situation that will really protect Lebanon's sovereignty towards Israel and towards Iranian interference and Hezbollah's actions in Lebanon? I don't believe we're there yet.
Yeah, indeed. The Lebanese House Speaker, Nabih Berri, seems to be cautiously optimistic, a bit like you, says that progress has been made, but he says that there are still some significant technical issues or technical details that need to be resolved. And I'm just wondering whether you can speculate with us as to what perhaps some of those stumbling blocks might be.
You know, the reality is that it really depends on how much the actors want to reach a ceasefire. And I believe that on the Israeli side, specifically, the willingness to reach a ceasefire is quite limited, at least until now. So from that perspective, it's quite easy to claim that you have technical problems or to, let's say, not invent, but find technical problems that prevent you from sealing a deal. If you really want a deal, it's I believe, easy to get done. As long as you reach, you know, a proper agreement on the core issues. So, what are the topics that might be stumbling blocks? Well, potentially the 13 points on the blue line, which is the Lebanon southern border. There are 13 points that are undecided since actually decades, and those 13 points need to be agreed upon. It seems that there is no agreement on those. Then there's also the topic of France's role in the committee. Benjamin Netanyahu said last Friday that he would refuse or reject any agreement that would include France in the oversight committee because France had accepted to execute the ICC's arrest warrant on himself and on Yoav Gallant, the former defense minister. So I believe they will always be able to find some excuses or some reasons not to seal the deal. Let's see how it goes now in the coming hours and days.
Yeah, indeed. There are people close to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu who've been quite vocal in saying they do not want a ceasefire deal. Most notably, the National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir saying a ceasefire would be a big mistake. And he said that Israel must press on with the war until, quote, absolute victory. And I'm just wondering, from an Israeli point of view, what would an absolute victory look like?
Well, you have to ask them first. But most probably what they claim they want, and it's not extremely clear, what they claim they want is most probably to have Hezbollah disarmed and disbanded entirely. But some of them want sometimes more. And initially they would say we just want the 1701 resolution applied, which requires Hezbollah to move north of the Litani, which is 30 to 40 kilometers from the southern border. And then they said we want to disarm Hezbollah entirely. And then the main internal objective for them is always that they want to send people from northern towns back to their homes. So this is the main message that they always send. But then you never really know what Israeli politicians might want. Typically, if you take Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's an extremist and a settler and a fundamentalist, well, his appetite might be more than that. But let's hope that that it won't be this, because that would put us in a very, very difficult situation if there's any appetite to occupy southern Lebanon, for instance, which we've already lived through from the 1980s till 2000.
Yeah, and I mentioned Nabil Barratt there as being the negotiator there, and he obviously, for the benefit of our viewers, represents the Shia voice. He's talking on behalf of Hezbollah, presumably with some guidelines from Hezbollah on what the terms and conditions of a deal could look like. And I'm just wondering whether you think the Americans and the Israelis regard him as being a credible, reliable negotiating partner.
Well, I believe they do, because they've kind of chosen him, or they're working with him. But here, as Lebanese, and this is what matters to me more than the Israeli or the American opinion, we as Lebanese have a problem with that, in a sense that we do respect Nabil Barratt's role as Speaker of Parliament, definitely. Yet we don't believe that it should be his job, to deal with the negotiations, to run the negotiations. This should be the executive branch of power that should be in charge with negotiating, which means that Najib Mikati should be doing that job. And actually, in a real ideal scenario, it should be the elected president of the republic that should be dealing with that negotiation.
But there isn't one.
Work, and the issue we have here is that we have a party and its allies, which is Hezbollah, that has been blocking the election of the president since October 2022. So it's been exactly 2 years and 1 month that Hezbollah is blocking the election of a president. And which leads us today to this vacuum at the helm of power and the absence of a proper executive branch of power. Hence, Nabil Barratt negotiating both on behalf of his partner, which is Hezbollah, and on behalf of the Lebanese state. But there's a huge conflict of interest here. How can you negotiate both in the name of the Lebanese state and in the name of a militia funded and governed by Iran that has been violating Lebanon's sovereignty and weakening the Lebanese state for the last 40 years? There's a real problem here, and this is where we as Lebanese need to, I believe, make our voices heard much more in order to have a proper independent representation for our interests as Lebanese citizens.
A couple of other developments. A UNIFIL mission has come under attack. A UNIFIL unit has come under attack. There are, of course, 10,000 UNIFIL soldiers on the ground in Lebanon. I'm just wondering how concerning it is, this report.
I believe that the Israelis have a very limited appetite for international law and for respecting international law, and they've shown it already in the past. They are ready to do anything to reach their goals, which are to deter anyone from preventing them from destroying what they want to destroy. And in that perspective, they've been attacking several times, shelling or entering actually with how do you call them? With a huge engine, with huge machines and tanks sometimes. And bulldozers, actually. They've been entering UNIFIL bases and shelling them several times. They've also been shelling a Lebanese army forces base on Saturday, I believe Saturday or Sunday morning, causing 2 casualties and 15 injured people. So we're talking about, an Israeli army that is ready to do anything in order to scare anyone in the south and to try and make them flee. They've done the same with ambulances, with health workers and paramedics, with doctors, with hospitals in the south. They've destroyed a couple of hospitals. And they've also been targeting directly journalists. I think the toll of journalists is close to 12, if I'm not mistaken. It's at least between 10 and 15 journalists that have been killed deliberately, as proven by several investigations. And today, there's a Human Rights Watch and a Guardian investigation that was published that showed that the Israeli strike in Hasbaya, southeast Lebanon, a month ago, killing 3 journalists, was actually a deliberate strike as well.
Okay, and just lastly, we've received reports that classes have been suspended in schools across Lebanon once again this Monday. And I'm just wondering what daily life actually looks like for the average Lebanese person in the context of this ongoing conflict.
Daily life is hard. It's punctuated by the sounds of bombs and shellings at night, but also in the morning. I wake up every morning with the sight of Dahi being bombed and with the fumes and the smoke coming up from the destroyed buildings. Some neighborhoods, some areas have been completely empty. People have ran away and trying to shelter or to find places to sleep outside of their houses. So for me, it's pretty easy, but for people that have been displaced, then it's much more difficult. It means you've lost everything you had very often. More than 100,000 residential units have been destroyed. So that means people are living either in shelters or renting some places or at families' places, cousins or else, but they've lost, very often what they cherish most, which is their home. So from that perspective, life is really hard. Their schools are opening and closing again, but let's not forget that we're talking here about the schools that are still open. But many schools have completely closed because they're in combat areas, so they cannot open anymore. Same thing with hospitals and many other public services. And that's for those who are still present in the country, because we don't talk here about the 500,000 people that were forced to flee the country, to leave Lebanon. And that's probably more than 10-15% of the population. Now, some of them are Syrian refugees, but still, it is still a very important part of the population that has also been emigrating. And this is what scares me a lot, which is to know with whom we will rebuild the country, who will remain after this war. Because the longer the war lasts, the less people there will be in the country, and the more difficult it will be to rebuild.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time today. Michel Helou, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Bangkok. It's the city of angels and the Venice of the East. Bangkok is one of the most visited cities in Southeast Asia. Thailand's capital city brings hundreds of thousands of visitors from all over the world each year. The largest and most developed city in Thailand, Bangkok offers tourists a mix of modern and upscale sights and sounds while maintaining its old charm from its historical architecture and traditions that date back to hundreds of years. One of the most famous is Wat Arun. located on the west bank of Chao Phraya River, opposite the Grand Palace. This is a must-see site in Bangkok, as the architectural design is completely unique to that of other temples in Thailand's capital. You can even climb its steep 70-meter high spire, which boasts the best views of Bangkok's skyline. While it is also known as the Temple of Dawn, Wat Arun is best at night when lit up, as it gives off a golden beam of light over the Chao Phraya River. The Grand Palace is the capital's most glorified and world-renowned structure. It was once the home of the Thai king, the royal court, and the administrative seat of government, and was built back in 1782. Marvel at its ancient designs, from the diverse array of Buddhist sculptures and temples that flow through the vicinity. Most popular is the Wat Prakil, or the Temple of the Emerald Buddha. Bangkok is also well known for its busy market scene. Anchored on either side of the river are boats stocked with fresh tropical fruits and veggies, coconut juice, and local food being cooked on open grills. Also popular are the floating markets Damnon Sadwak, Ampawa, and Klong Lat Mayom. Likewise, Bangkok's mall scene is alive and kicking, with enough shops stretching from Siam along Sukhumvit Road to last a lifetime. Also within Bangkok's cosmopolitan urban jungle are the expert tailors that can be seen on almost every street. You can get a tailor-made suit together for just about a week or two at a very reasonable price. Despite the city's known busyness, Bangkok also offers experiences for rest and recluse. Massage parlors can be found all over Bangkok, offering a Thai oil massage, head, neck and back massage, foot massage, and many more. One can also opt for a nature respite from the sprawling concrete jungle nearby within the city. It is known for its lush tropical trees, lakes, and raised embankments that pass unique houses on stilts built along the Chao Phraya River's edge.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics, and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake, and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Seoul. We give you a tour to the soul of South Korea's Seoul City. It's the destination that offers tourists endless shopping and dining experiences, a dose of fun and entertainment, its ages-old traditions, history, and unique culture. For the first-timer, get a quick introduction through the city via the Seoul City Bus Tour. It's a top recommended way to see Seoul on your first day. It will speed through Seoul's top city highlights, which you can view during the day or in the evening. It's time to visit the arts and festival scene of South Korea. Of course, Korea is popular for its history and tradition, but Seoul has just a lot of modern, international, and contemporary events to offer. There's always a regular listing of festivals and performances in the city, as well as exhibits on display at the art museums. Done sightseeing? Time for shopping. Seoul is in fact known for all the shopping, cultural events aside. The Koreans actually refer to window shopping as eye shopping. The top places to visit are Insadong, Apgujeong, Myeongdong, Dongdaemun, and Itaewon. fan of Korean dramas and K-pop? Well, Seoul is definitely the place for that. Seoul is the popular capital of Hallyu, or the Korean wave in pop culture. And the city is teeming with items to adorn your K-pop fandom with. Then there are the Korean traditional markets. BB creams and bibimbap aside, this is the place to experience the traditional Korea. This is where you can buy traditional products such as the hanbok, ginseng, or electronics. Practically everything is sold there. There are also food stalls that offer Korean food, such as blood sausage, bindae-tteok, or deep-fried Korean pancakes, kimbap, mekioli, among others. Also a must-visit is the Namsan Seoul Tower. It's an iconic landmark that offers the best spot to see the entire Seoul. It has a warm, luminescent glow at night. The tower also has a revolving restaurant, which is a popular place to dine for touring couples. Namsan Seoul Tower is also where couples will find the famous locks of love and can leave their own too.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place. Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Welcome to the show. I'm Riz Khan. The annual cost of cybercrime is expected to reach $10 trillion next year. To put that figure into context, in terms of GDP, it would be the third biggest economy in the world after the US and China. That's why countries from Australia to China, the UK and US are racing to tighten up their cybersecurity laws. And it's why the UN is expected to pass a landmark cyber treaty in the coming weeks. From deepfakes and disinformation to hacks and attacks on infrastructure, healthcare and security networks, cybercrime is becoming the #1 challenge for law enforcement and intelligence agencies. And artificial intelligence is already changing the rules of the game. Now, our increasingly connected digital world makes us all more vulnerable to criminal gangs and state-sponsored hackers who can access our data and devices. Imagine them taking control of your bank account, your electrical vehicle, and even your pacemaker. Let's continue that theme of cyber psychology with a woman whose work in the field inspired the hit TV crime drama CSI Cyber. In fact, her character is played by an Oscar-winning Hollywood actress. As many experts will tell you, humans are often regarded as the weakest link when it comes to cybersecurity. Dr. Mary Aiken's work includes profiling hackers and identifying their vulnerabilities. But she's ready to back her own brain against AI any day. Dr. Mary Aiken, great to have a chance to chat with you because it's been fascinating to find out the kind of areas you cover. Now, I do want to start, though, with your role on CSI Cyber, how you've been portrayed there. Tell me about that.
Yes, actually, I was doing some work for the White House on tech solutions to human trafficking, and there was some publicity around it, and afterwards I got a call from William Morris, and I thought it was Philip Morris, the cigarette company, so I said, I don't do endorsements. Anyway, turned out to be an agency. They brought me to Hollywood. I met some people, and the next thing, they created a division of the show, CSI, CSI New York, CSI Miami, CSI Cyber, based on my work, and Patricia Arquette played me in the show.
That's pretty good. I was like, well, it's at least getting some visibility there as well. And I want to ask you, how much does a TV series like that actually portray the reality?
I think that, they're metaphors, so when we're talking about something in a television show, what we're trying to do is sort of provide explanatory value. We're trying to educate general population. So there's a famous scene that we did had this operator looking at code on the screen, and it was all green, and all of a sudden the malware showed up as red, and the operator said, "Oh, we've got malware." And of course the InfoSec community went crazy because they said, "That's not how it works. Malware doesn't jump out as red code." But it was a metaphor that an experienced operator would see it as red code. Of course, there was all this trouble online about it and how we were dumbing down, computer science and InfoSec. And then the US Army cavalry came to my rescue in the form of West Point. And they wrote an article in defense of CSI Cyber saying how important it was. The series aired in 170 countries worldwide.
One thing is new to a lot of people is this term cyber psychology. Explain that in a simple way.
Cyber psychology is the study of the impact of technology on human behavior. It's about 20 years old as a discipline, which is really young, and I'm one of the pioneers in the field. I'm a professor of cyber psychology in London, and I'm a professor of forensic cyber psychology in the US. Forensic cyber psychology is the study of criminal, deviant, and abnormal behavior, and I'm kept pretty busy.
I'm sure. And I love the fact you're not scared to speak your mind, because I know you don't really like the term cyber resilience. Explain why.
Yes, so we're here at GCF, and we had a panel earlier today talking about cyber resilience, well, cognitive resilience particularly. And I suppose, as a cyber behavioral scientist, you often come across these terms, and my guess is, and yeah, I'm probably right, I'm sure it was a term invented by a computer scientist who said, well, we've got resilience in systems, and they can, be resilient during an attack, and then they can bounce back quickly afterwards. So let's retranspose that construct to humans and then develop resilience in humans. My point is that, okay, if we're going to talk about resilience, let's talk about the psychology of resilience. So across the general population, if you had, say, 4 people in a family, there's a strong genetic component. One person will have no resilience, 2 of them will be 50-50 on resilience, and 1 will be extremely resilient. So I object to the term because where are we going with collective cybersecurity? Is it a Darwinian push towards survival of the tech fittest? That's not fair.
So really, that is an interesting thought, tech fittest or cyber fittest, in effect, someone who can handle that. Basically, that suggests it's not just a simple vertical silo. It's not something that can be handled in a simple way. It has to be a much broader understanding.
I think you've got to factor the human into the equation, and not in a sort of, scientific or computer science or infosec science way of sort of an approximation of what it is to be human. When we talk about protecting critical infrastructure, what is the most critical infrastructure that we're trying to protect? It's humans, it's us, our families, our communities, our cities, our nations. That's what we're trying to protect, is the humans.
From your research and all that you've seen in your studies, how much more vulnerable are we now? The fact we all have devices, young people have access to almost everything. You say cyber psychology, the impact of this technology on our minds, it must be pretty intense.
Well, when things go wrong, look, there are a lot of things that are great about tech. I was just asked earlier about internet addiction and how do I control my technology use. I'm probably the worst person. I'm a cyber psychologist. I spend a disproportionate amount of my time online. But the point is, in terms of you and I, we're sort of done, we're cooked. Like, not a lot is going to go wrong in terms of our neural activity and our use of technology. But the developing child, when I see 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds with mobile phone devices, when, millions of neurons are making connections, we have to think about that. There's a great paper by the American Academy of Pediatrics, and it's called The Good, the Bad, and the Unknown. I worry about the unknown in terms of the impact of technology on the developing child.
How much real thought is being given to this right now? Because everyone seems to run at such a fast pace. Do people pay enough attention to this potential unknown?
I think that to a certain extent, parents have sort of given up. it's too much. They're trying to manage and juggle their busy lives. The kids seem happy on their devices. And there's not enough education and awareness raising about the impact of that technology in a good way, in terms of like enhancing fine motor skills and, the deficits associated with that and the problems associated with inappropriate use of technology. So I think we just have to be, we need, in the real world, we have ages of development. If you have children, you knew what age they should sit up and say their first words and take their first step. What's the equivalent in a cyber context in terms of ages of cyber development? And how do we inform parents about that?
And when people talk about cyber threats, cyber attacks and so on, I know you also have a very clear perspective on this because they do vary.
Yes, again, we were discussing earlier and somebody was saying, a cyber attack is a major event and then everything else should be considered a cyber incident. I don't agree with that. If somebody broke into your home and hit you over the head and went upstairs and pulled up your mattress and took, your savings, $10,000 from under your bed, that's an attack. When somebody is targeted online in terms of cyber fraud or extortion in terms of an investment that goes wrong, which is, cyber fraudulent investment, and somebody loses their life savings and they're humiliated and incredibly depressed as a result, that's an attack. If a young boy is coerced into a relationship online and then sextorted as a result, that's an attack. If a small business is held to ransom and people lose their livelihood in terms of a ransomware attack, that's not an incident. That is an attack.
How do you regard disinformation and deep fakes and fake news? What sort of attack do they present then?
I think disinformation, and we've seen in the UK recently how disinformation online can lead to public disorder. And, there's a symbiotic relationship between cyberspace and the real world. What happens in cyberspace impacts the real world. What happens in the real world impacts cyberspace. So when you get this massive amounts of mis and disinformation online, it can lead to public order incidents. I mean, we saw that with the March on Capitol Hill in the US. And mis and disinformation, the potential impact in terms of elections. Mis and disinformation for young people. There was a recent piece of research, and something like 60% of young people thought that mainstream media was disinformation, fake news. So how are we going to maintain social order in civil society when people can no longer trust sources?
You're a pioneer in cyber psychology, and AI has come in now. Everything's moving so fast. How hard is it for you to keep up, and what impact is AI going to have?
Oh, I can beat AI any day, hands down. I mean, I've got a million-year-old piece of technology that's been in development for 1 million years, the human brain. On any given day, that is going to beat AI. AI, we mistake it as human intelligence because it can do some things incredibly quickly. That's not intelligence. That's just a task. That's like sweeping versus using a hoover. It's not intelligence. As a behavioral scientist, I can categorically say that we barely understand how the human brain works. To create something that replicates something we don't understand, it's a false premise. So I think what we have to do is look at not AI replacing humans, but IA, intelligence augmentation, the work of Licklider, who wrote in 1950 about man-computer symbiosis, that symbiotic relationship between man and machine, placing the human at the center of the decision-making process.
Let's end with perhaps 3 bullet point pieces of advice to people on how they can build their sense of strength against this, how they can, if you like, manage their cyber psychology.
I think the first thing that people need to do is understand the potential impact of technology on their lives. The second thing they've got to do is educate themselves about what the possibilities are and what strategies they could deploy. And then the third strategy is actually deploy. Do it. Just do it.
Dr. Mary Aiken, what a pleasure. Thank you so much. I look forward to speaking with you again.
You're welcome. Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Singapore, one of Asia's top city attractions and a quick developing place for business, Singapore. The city's unique cosmopolitan culture is a harmonious marriage of the old and the new. You'll see high-rising modern skyscrapers alongside heritage buildings all around this island city. Transportation is also fast and efficient for the locals and tourists. The award-winning Changi Airport provides connections with over 100 airlines flying to more than 200 cities around the world. Because of its pro-business environment, more than 7,000 multinational companies make Singapore an often visited city for work-related transactions. For visitors, Singapore's attraction lies in its good impression as a safe, clean, and efficient place to be. One of the most popular tourist spots is the Singapore Flyer. It is the world's largest observation wheel outside the United States. It stands at a stunning 165 meters and offers a magnificent view of the cityscape. As the wheel turns, you'll get a 360-degree view of Singapore's iconic and historical landmarks and views, from the Marina Bay to the Singapore River, Raffles Place, Merlion Park, Empress Place, and the Padang. On the other hand, set your sights on the historical structures resting within the modern city. The old Chinese buildings in Chinatown, Muslim characteristic of Kampong Glam, and Little India's district are still popular among tourists. Also known for their history are the Chimes, Dalhousie Obelisk, Merlion Park, Old Parliament House, National Museum, Asian Civilizations Museum, and World War II sites like Battle Box, Changi Chapel and Museum, Fort Siloso, and Kranji War Memorial. Visitors of the city can enjoy the best of Chinese, Malay, Indian, and Eurasian cultures through the many traditional and religious festivals that fill the Singapore calendar. Proof of its multicultural feats are the hawker centers scattered throughout the island city. Singapore's first 1960s themed food street, the Singapore Food Trail, serves up a wide selection of local hawker delights. A melting pot of a city, Singapore is a place where individuals of different races live harmoniously together.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.